up? I got Naskin here with me. This ain't a diss song, but yeah, you know what it is. I'm a cheesehead, y'all niggas cheese whiz. Pittsburgh Steelers, that's nothing. That Super Bowl ring, that's nothing. Pull up in your town when you
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Packers Unscripted from Packers.com. I am Mike Spofford, joined, as always, by my trusted colleague, Wes Hodkiewicz. We're coming to you here from our studios at Lambeau Field. And, Wes, week 2 is upon us here. Packers-Vikings coming up on Sunday, the home opener for the Green Bay Packers, Sunday at Lambeau Field. But we can look back for a few minutes first at the Packers' Week 1 victory last Thursday night in Chicago over the Bears. And one aspect that we didn't really touch on our Friday show before we broke for the weekend was the involvement of the tight ends right away, game 1, week 1 in this Green Bay offense, because you look at how this game unfolded. Jimmy Graham had a touchdown catch, already half of his total of touchdown catches from a year ago. Marcedes Lewis had 2 receptions when he had 3 receptions all of last year, his first year in Green Bay. And Robert Tonyan had a big catch on a scoring drive in the fourth quarter when he didn't catch a pass last year until Seattle in November, whatever week of the season that was. So Matt LaFleur is getting his tight ends. He's only got 3 healthy ones right now, but he's getting his tight ends involved early and often here in 2019.
Yeah, and it's funny listening to Marcedes Lewis talk in the locker room on Friday a little bit about this. I mean, when he got brought in, I think Brian Gutekunst and the Packers wanted him, but they really weren't sure how they were going to go about using him. So in some ways, he became almost a glorified 6th offensive lineman. It's almost the way it worked out. He only played 170 snaps. As you mentioned, he only had 3 catches. He did talk about when he came back this year, he had a conversation with Brian Gutekunst about what the direction was going to be. This was right after they'd hired Matt LaFleur, what this whole thing's going to look like. And what it came down to is that things are going to be different. And I thought this game in particular really showed what the Packers envisioned for this tight end position in this game. Now, it's not like anybody had a 100-yard game or anything like that, but when you put together Jimmy Graham's 30 catches for 30 yards and a touchdown, Tonyan's 28-yard catch, Marcedes Lewis being involved more in the passing game, all told 6 catches for 72 yards and a touchdown in a game in which the Packers didn't throw for 400 yards. I mean, that was almost half of their entire production, a little less than in terms of the passing yardage. So this, I thought, was a really good indicator of where this offense wants to go. 35 snaps, 34 snaps, and 20 snaps for Graham, Lewis, and Tonyan, respectively. Again, it's week 1. Well, a lot of football to be played out, but from Marcedes Lewis' perspective, the Packers living up to their end of the bargain with the way that they're moving these pieces around.
Yeah, and Marcedes Lewis almost getting a 3rd reception in that game. That back shoulder throw along the sideline from Rodgers, really, tough catch, close one, almost had it, but you get the feeling that if Aaron Rodgers is throwing a back shoulder throw in week 1 to Marcedes Lewis, that he's not going to miss it again. They didn't quite connect on that one, but that might be something we see down the road.
Well, and Rodgers has been really effusive in his praise of both Graham and Lewis through the highs and the lows of this offense. And he even said, yes, he did have his comment last month during training camp about how Lewis came back in phenomenal shape. He ended up losing about 10 pounds. He's a huge leader in this locker room. It was important for the Packers to get him back. But even if you go back to the end of last season, he was saying the exact same thing about Graham and Lewis and his belief of what those 2 guys could do if they could get the offense sort of reconfigured and trying to determine the best roles for all of these guys. The thing that Lewis really likes about the way this is working out is you don't necessarily have to run one tight end into the ground. You don't have to play him 60 snaps a game.
Sure.
You can be balanced. There can be times where, Jimmy Graham's the solo guy. There can be times when Lewis and Tonyan are in a 2 tight end package. So, and from Matt LaFleur's perspective, when he went to the podium at the end of last week, the whole idea of this has been what they've talked about all along, is that the more packages that you can throw at defenses, the more you give them to prepare for. you could very easily come out on one series with a 2 tight end look with Lewis and Tanyan, maybe even have Vitale in the background as a fullback and really bring things in. Or you could come back out the next series and have Trevor Davis and Marquez Valdez-Scantling out there and really threaten the second level of the defense and third level of the defense. So that's where the Packers want to get this offense. It is a work in progress, Aaron, but I think when you listen to Aaron Rodgers' words, Matt LaFleur's words, and certainly these tight ends, there's optimism about what this thing is going to look like when the Packers get it, the way they want it to.
Yeah, we certainly saw Jimmy Graham throwing caution to the wind, you might say, with that hurdle play on the one reception, and he's out there battling with the finger injury, but made a couple of catches, had the nice touchdown catch to get the Packers on the board there in the first half in Chicago. Another part of this offensive effort, though, that we need to talk about, because obviously at this time last year, when we were talking about the Bears, we were talking about Khalil Mack and how he just completely wrecked the entire first half of Week 1 at Lambeau Field. Mack had a couple of plays in this game. He's going to make his plays here and there. But we didn't come out of Soldier Field on Thursday night and get on that plane to come home talking about this great, huge impact that Khalil Mack had in this game. And hats off really to the Packers' offensive tackles, Bryan Bulaga and David Bakhtiari. Mack lined up, across almost anywhere throughout the game. But the Packers held the big star in check, and that was a big factor. And I know it wasn't a great night on offense, but as we talked about, Packers didn't turn it over. Aaron Rodgers did get sacked a few times, but he held on to the ball, all of that. Khalil Mack was not a big factor in this game, and that was a big factor in the Packers winning.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. And the thing with Mack is that, you see it, 5 tackles, 1 tackle for a loss, no quarterback hits, no sacks. That's the way you want it to look, because if you go back and look at last season, it didn't so much happen against the Packers, but there were games where Mack completely flipped it on its head based on his play by himself.
Right.
So to keep him under control, I think, is a big feather in the cap of the tackles. I want to talk about quickly just Bryan Bulaga in particular, because when we finally got through everything this weekend, got a chance to go back and look at some of those plays, the Bulaga is so consistent with how he approaches the game. And even keeled, he's been around this game for a long time. The way he prepares himself, the way he prepares his body, the plan that the Packers had for him to get to Week 1 as healthy as possible.
All the way through the spring and the
Absolutely.
summer, the OTAs and in training camp, everything was planned out in terms of his snaps, his workload, his reps to get ready and stay healthy for Week 1.
Yeah, and I really like that approach, because last year, as you and I have talked about, it was sort of like, okay, you're trying to get him healthy, coming back from the ACL, trying to get him some work at the end of camp. This year, a lot more balanced, a lot more pace. And I just felt like that performance against Mack and the fact that the Packers were able to kind of keep him out of it for the most part. It's a volatile defense. There's going to be other areas that are going to stress you. But Mack can be the one that really tips everything in the Bears' favor, and they didn't allow him to do that. From Bulaga's perspective, with where he's at in his point of his career, taking that approach, his health, everything, to have that kind of performance against Mack right out of the gate, I think really is going to be something that can be a galvanizing moment for him as he looks to now get back in his comfort zone after really having to play catch-up last season throughout September.
Yeah, you turn on a few snaps of the game film from Thursday night watching Bulaga against Mack, and you can just see the difference in where Bulaga is in Week 1 this year compared to last year when, he made, quite frankly, a miraculous recovery in terms of the timeline from the ACL injury. We had talked about that he was actually ready to play Week 1, and to his credit, he did that. But to go against Khalil Mack in Week 1 against the Bears, he wasn't necessarily fully ready for that. Right. And he was absolutely ready for everything that Week 1 brought this time. And Bryan Bulaga, quite frankly, is in a different place health-wise right now, September of 2019, than he was in September of 2018.
Well, and I think, too, when the years go on and time passes, people are going to appreciate Bryan Bulaga a lot more than maybe even they do today, just for that reason.
I agree with you.
You blink your eye like that, and he's a 10-year vet. He's a guy that's held down that position. When you use a first-round pick on a tackle, what do you want to get out of it? You want to be able to have a guy that you can plug there for 10 years and not worry about it. He's worked through some injuries. He's fought through a lot. But I think, ultimately when this thing's all said and done and you look at how many games he actually played in for the Packers and what he played through, I think his career is going to hold up really well. And nice thing for the Packers' perspective right now. This is a guy who entered the league when he was 20, 21 years old.
Right.
I think there's a lot of faith that there's still a lot of tread on the tire, and this is a guy that could still be, a big presence for them at that right tackle spot.
Well, it's interesting when you look at his career because you talk about he has fought through some injuries. Longtime offensive tackles here like Mark Tauscher and Chad Clifton, they fought through their share of injuries as well. When you look at it in the big picture, the grand scheme of things, a lot of those guys have had similar careers in that what they've had to fight through, but yet gotten themselves to steadily play at a really, really high level to help this team. And when an offensive coordinator can trust his offensive tackles, that's just a big boost every week going into that game planning meeting when he feels comfortable with his guys on the edge.
Yeah, and it's 100% injury rate at that position too. I know looking at the game, I watched a lot of games on Sunday with us having that opportunity to kind of sit back and obviously not work that day. And the one that stood out to me was the Cleveland game after it was Greg Robinson got ejected, the left tackle for the Browns. They had to move in their backup tackle, I forget his name, Lamb. The third or fourth play that he's in the game, they end up giving up a sack in the end zone. It's a safety against Baker Mayfield. The play ends with the edge rusher and Mayfield collapsing on, I believe his name was Lamb, his ankle. Oh. And it's just funny to me that position, sometimes guys get injury labels. It's almost like every single position, every single injury that happens at that spot on the offensive line, it's almost always a freak kind of thing just because of the randomness of it. So to be able to have Bulaga there, and certainly what David Bakhtiari's done now in the last 6 seasons, that's a difficult thing to be able to accomplish, to have two pillars like that. And the teams that you see that you look at Dallas, what they're doing right now. Sure. They're the ones that usually are the ones playing meaningful football in December and January.
Yeah, well, you started talking about week 1, and I want to get to some more reflections on the opening weekend of NFL football. But first, select Cousins Subs locations are now offering delivery. Whether you're ordering catering or your favorite sub, they're delivering right to you when you order online at cousinsubs.com. Cousins Subs, we believe in better. All right, well, we will spend a good portion of the coming week talking about the Minnesota Vikings, West, but we certainly have to mention here what they did in week 1 at home against the Atlanta Falcons, an absolutely dominating performance against an opponent many feel is a playoff contender in the NFC, and obviously a former MVP quarterback in Matt Ryan. Minnesota looked darn good.
It was funny. I didn't even realize until the end of the game that Kirk Cousins had thrown 10 passes.
10 passes.
And, okay, there's 2 different storylines to this game. One, Minnesota's still Minnesota, and it's a team that they felt like they underachieved last year, but they still have a lot of talent.
Yep.
Dalvin Cook, he looks like he's going to be a problem for the NFL for years to come, so long as he stays healthy. The other thing, though, that I do have to at least make mention of, there was a lot of hope and optimism that things were going to be different for Atlanta's defense this year. I don't know if that's necessarily going to be the case, because this was as rudimentary of a game as I think that you could ask for in 2019. You didn't have to worry about the downfield pass from Kirk Cousins. They made it abundantly clear, we're going to run it down your throat. And it's not even like Dalvin Cook had 1 carry for 60 yards. His longest was 22, and he had a 5.3 yard per carry clip.
Yeah.
They just could not stop him.
Yeah.
And Matt Ryan had the 2 picks, the takeaways and things like that. When Minnesota and that Zimmer defense is clicking the way it can look. I think if you asked me on Saturday night who I thought would win this game, I thought it would be Minnesota. Sure. I did not expect them to punch the Falcons in the mouth the way they did.
Yeah, I mean it was a dominating performance by Minnesota in all 3 phases. Their defense, as you said, they got the sacks and the takeaways. I do think couple of opportunities where the Falcons had a chance to get back in that
Absolutely.
game. Matt Ryan made some horrendous decisions for a veteran quarterback and accomplished quarterback to make a couple of decisions he made there that really took his team out of the game. But the Vikings also had a block punt on special teams. Right. Obviously, you mentioned the running game with Dalvin Cook and Kirk Cousins, barely broke a sweat with only having to throw 10 passes. So
he threw 3 passes in the second half.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they were up 21-0 or whatever
much.
it was. Why would you bother throwing the ball and your running back's getting 5 yards a carry? So, But also, if we look at Week 1 in the NFC North, a really interesting game out in Arizona with the Detroit Lions.
Yeah, it was.
T.J. Hawkinson came on the scene. I believe he set an NFL rookie record for a tight end debut with 130 some receiving yards or whatever. So T.J. Hawkinson, top 10 draft pick, he will definitely be a guy to watch. But
he looks good in pads too, man.
Yeah,
when you see
I
him
tell
on
ya.
the field, that's an NFL tight end.
Yeah.
It's impressive.
Yeah, you can see why he was drafted as high as he was. But the Detroit Lions, 24-6 lead in the fourth quarter. They let it get away, and they end up in an overtime tie at 27-27 with Kyler Murray, the rookie quarterback for the Cardinals, bringing his club all the way back. If there is such a thing as a gut punch when you tie in a game, this is it, because the Detroit Lions had this game. I don't know. I still don't know how you really let it get away.
You want to know why it's a big gut punch? Cliff Kingsbury was walking to the post-game handshake with Matt Patricia with a smile on his face after a tie.
After a tie.
The sense of relief and the fact that Arizona even had a chance to win that game. They had the ball. They were driving. They were able to get 2 first downs, and then it stopped.
Yeah.
They end up punting it with a minute left in overtime. And then
Did you see the last play of the game?
Yeah, they almost got picked.
Stafford almost throws the pick on the sideline. If I think it was Brock, maybe was the defensive back. If he hangs on to that and steps out of bounds with 4 or 5 seconds left, they can send out the kicker one play and win the game. And Detroit would have lost. It's just everything that happened from really the beginning of the fourth quarter to the end of that game was just bizarre in a lot of ways.
But it's funny, man. The years change, the offenses change. Things get different, but at the end of the day, Detroit struggled to run the ball again. And Matthew Stafford, for his money, for the most part, other than that throw late, made some nice throws throughout the game, had a solid performance. But I can't think of too many instances where one quarterback outbeats the other quarterback by a 35 passer rating, and yet the other quarterback was the one that had the chance to win the game at the end. There was just a little bit of a comedy of errors, not being able to finish, not getting the drives when you needed them.
Well, I think this is an absolute reflection of what the Detroit Lions have been looking for years, which is to find a running game. Because if you have a 24-6 lead in the fourth quarter on the road, if you can run the football with any effectiveness at all, you're going to close out that game. They haven't had a running game. They still can't seem to find it. Kerryon Johnson was looking like he would be the guy last year. He really didn't do much for them yesterday when they needed to be able to run the football. Stafford ended up with nice numbers, good stats and everything. And as you said, if you have a 30-point, 35-point differential in the passer rating, that's a game you're supposed to win.
Absolutely. And to credit, you got to give credit where credit's due. Kyler Murray had about as terrible, disastrous of a first half as you could for a rookie quarterback with those kind of expectations.
Shook it off.
What did he do? He found his 2 biggest weapons, David Johnson and Larry Fitzgerald.
Larry Fitzgerald, yeah.
Old, reliable, and Johnson, just when he's right, how dynamic he can be with mixing in what he does as a pass catcher. I'm not saying these are 2 playoff teams or anything like that, but if I'm Kyler Murray, certainly you wanted to finish that last drive. You wanted to win that game for the Cardinals, but the way he battled back, I think speaks volumes about a young quarterback and what he needs to do, because it wasn't that he just plays weren't going his way, he was playing poorly. He's getting balls deflected at the line of scrimmage. It's everything that you think of, as far as what you fear with a shorter quarterback. And later on, he just started to find a way. He got comfortable. He made plays with his feet, and they were able to edge out a tie.
Yeah. Well, also in Week 1, you had mentioned it briefly earlier, the Cleveland Browns, I think. If there was one result in Week 1 that kind of floored me, it was seeing that the Cleveland Browns at home against the Tennessee Titans lost by 30 points. I didn't see the game, but I went back and I watched the highlights, and you mentioned the safety that was early on. This was a 15-13 game, late third quarter, and then suddenly Tennessee hits a screen pass that goes the distance 75 yards for a touchdown, and then Baker Mayfield gets intercepted on 3 consecutive possessions in the fourth quarter. You talk about a snowball going downhill that just wasn't going to stop. This just turned ugly for Cleveland.
So I actually did. I watched this entire game, mostly because I just was really curious to see how the Browns are going to look. Tony Romo kind of pulled a Spofford in it, where you remember where you were like, oh, yeah, Jake Kummerow, he hasn't dropped anything, and then he like dropped something the very next practice.
Yeah.
Romo was like crediting Mayfield, like, hey, you're behind right now, but he's doing a great job of managing this game. He's not making, he's being careful with the football. And then I swear the words were barely even out of his mouth, and it was the first pick, the second pick, and the third pick. I will say this, and we have to see again where all these chips fall. It's just week one.
Hey, it's week one. It's one game for everybody. One loss, one win, no matter how you slice it.
Doug Vrabel has the Tennessee Titans looking good. That defense is legit. And offensively, Marcus Mariota still has his weak spots. But I don't even know who the offensive coordinator is this year, but they do such a good job of playing to his strengths with that offense, and having Delaney Walker back, you can see what kind of difference that makes. I think Derrick Henry looked really solid. That screen play, the blocking they had downfield to spring him on that long connection. Those are the kind of things you need to do to win games like this. They went into Cleveland, a lot of buzz there, and they brought him back down to earth. I think you got to tip your cap to the Titans.
Yeah, it's kind of the slogan I think now in Cleveland is hold the hype, because this was a hype team, and I admit I still think Cleveland could be a playoff contender, because
Absolutely.
It doesn't regardless of what the Ravens did against the Miami Dolphins, that AFC North is completely up for grabs.
Right.
I mean, anybody could take that one. But any other impressions from Week 1? Obviously, the New England Patriots defended their Super Bowl, started the defense of their Super Bowl title with an absolutely dominating victory in primetime over the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yeah, it's a big wake-up call there in terms of the Patriots are just going to keep doing what the Patriots do. Tom Brady is so effective at running that offense. Even depending on what happens with Antonio Brown here, I think that looks like a pretty complete offense to begin with, even without having Rob Gronkowski. Pittsburgh has some questions to answer there. I think, Juju Smith-Schuster without having Antonio Brown there, it's going to be a different game for him, and he's going to have to adapt to that. Stephon Gilmore did a good job against him. And also, just to throw this out there, it is the Miami Dolphins. That house is burning down right now. But the Baltimore Ravens, Mike, you and I saw a little bit of that starting offense. Lamar Jackson is not just he's not standing there to run and hand off the football. He will throw.
Yep.
And he has a phenomenal target, Hollywood Brown, right now. The Ravens are going to be fun to watch this season.
Yeah, that's a dynamic quarterback that I'm not even sure that we've really even started to scratch the surface of maybe what that offense is going to look like as this season evolves, because Lamar Jackson's not a rookie anymore, and he doesn't look like a rookie.
And what do, Mike? You go back to 1930 or 1942 when Cecil Isbell was throwing to Don Hudson. You run, you keep getting that ground production, and then you hit him with a big play downfield. Yeah. The Ravens are doing it as good as anyone right now.
Well, with the Cecil Isbell, Don Hudson reference, we will call it a wrap on this edition of Packers Unscripted. Be sure to follow all of our coverage of the team on Packers.com. Subscribe to us, like us on iTunes and other podcast services, if you please. On Twitter, he's at Wes Hott. I'm at Mike Spofford at Packers for the team account. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We'll see you next time.